The views and opinions expressed on this show belong solely to the hosts and their guests and do not reflect the views of any on-site institutions unless explicitly stated.
What's up, everybody? My name is Steve Vanderwall.
And I'm Justin Klosser.
And we're your hosts of Cannabis Cum Laude, a podcast devoted entirely to cannabis. We're going to talk cultivation, business, medicine, politics, culture, advocacy, and everything in between.
The cannabis industry is complicated. It's robust. It has a lot of moving parts. And it's our job to help you understand it just a little bit better. So tune in every week for a brand new episode. And if you have a question that you'd like answered on the show, send it on over to questions@cannabiscumlaude.com. Thanks. Enjoy the show.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Cannabis Cum Laude, which, in case you forgot, means cannabis with distinction. And this week, we are really taking distinction to the next level with an Ivy League cannabis researcher, Dr. Heather Grab, who is a senior lecturer at Cornell University's College of Agricultural and Life Sciences and the School of Integrated Plant Science. In this role, she focuses her teaching exclusively on hemp, where she is a huge contributor to today's topic. Cornell's Hemp MPS program, which is a Master's of Professional Studies program. She delivers best practices for the cultivation and processing of cannabis and hemp to professionals in Cornell's Hemp Science program. And prior to this position, she served as a postdoc researcher in the entomology department at Cornell, where she contributed greatly to our topic of part 2 today, which is bees and hemp. Dr. Greb, welcome to the show. How are you today?
I'm doing well. It's a treat to be here with you guys.
Absolutely. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, we were talking. It's always great to have people in studio. You know, we have guests from across the country, and Zoom is always great in technology. But to have somebody like yourself join us in studio to talk today is it's really awesome. So thanks for being here.
Happy to be here.
So what I really want to know is, like, what exactly is an MPS program and what is it used for? Because from what I gather, it seems like it's a shorter program. So how does that kind of differ from others?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you bring that up right from the front, because it is a different kind of degree from those that we're most familiar with. So being on the academic track, people are really familiar with a research track master's program or a PhD program. But this is targeted more towards folks who want to go into industry rather than going into research per se. So you can think of it as an equivalent to something like a MFA, an MBA, an MEng, that kind of thing. Our program is especially different from a research track master's program because it is condensed into a 1-year really intensive program. So it's a lot of coursework in those first 2 semesters, fall and spring. And then that's followed up by a little bit of independent research or work on some kind of a capstone project.
Which probably ties everything together pretty nicely.
Yeah, that's sort of the general idea of the program is in terms of, I know you guys have already talked about some of the other programs that exist in New York State and those that are being developed more broadly on the national landscape. I think you've talked about the FLCC program on the show. You've touched on a couple of the other certificate programs that are coming into being these days. Yeah, exactly. Or Mooresville's got even more of they're developing a lot of the undergraduate coursework. So our program kind of slots in that space that's following an undergraduate education, although I will say the coursework that we do is available to undergraduate students at Cornell. So especially upper level undergraduates who have some experience in plant sciences or horticulture, or even who are working in areas like economics or law
ecology or
that
something.
are going, that want to go into the industry and develop that background knowledge to hit the ground running.
So what does the coursework and kind of curriculum look like for this program?
Yeah, I mentioned before that it is really coursework intensive in those, first 2 semesters. There's a whole series of courses that we have developed explicitly for this program. So really giving folks breadth and depth within the hemp and cannabis industry. So it starts off with our sort of course that lays the groundwork, which is called Cannabis Biology, Society, and Industry. That's taught by Carlin Buckler. That is a fantastic overview course. I mean, this touches all areas of the industry. So from policy, from the biology of the plant itself, different methods of growing and processing. She brings in industry leaders from, entrepreneurs who are innovating in the space and building out different business models, all the way to folks who are on the regulatory side of things. So that gives you a pretty broad understanding of the current state of the entire industry. That same semester, students are also taking my production systems course. So it's called Hemp Production Systems. And again, we are focusing on a broad array of different production practices and market segments. So it's not just focused on cannabinoid hemp production, but we also dig in a lot on other areas of the industry, like grain and fiber production.
Yeah, I think it's super important to have an overview course because cannabis is so complicated. It's not just cultivation. It's not just processing, retail. It's law. It's economics. It's a whole universe. And I don't think most people realize that, which is why we took a very broad spectrum approach to this podcast, because once you kind of lay out policy and cultivation, people are like, wow, I want to niche in that, or I want to niche in that. So bravo to your team for putting such a class together. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So are there any, not really extracurriculars, but I'm going to call them extracurriculars that are involved? Like, do people have to take statistics or writing or anything of this nature along with it, or are they all cannabis centralized?
Yeah. So just to give us an idea of the core courses, I mentioned the Cannabis Biology Industry Society and Hemp Production Systems. Those are definitely two of the core foundational courses that students will take in their first semester. But in the second semester, there's another set of 3 classes. So I also teach hemp processing, which goes into once you've grown the plant, how do you actually harvest, store, and process those raw materials into something with added value in a way that maximizes quality and return on investment. And we can talk about that class a little bit more later if you want to. In addition to that, students also take a class that's specifically on breeding and genetics, learning about the latest advances within that side of the industry, and pharmacology, which is another huge part of the cannabis industry.
We had Cody Peterson on, Dr. Cody Peterson, to talk about cannabis pharmacology. It was really great conversation. That's something that a lot of people who get into the cannabis industry don't really even take into consideration, is the actual molecules and what they're doing to your body, other than, oh, I'm high, I'm a little bit sleepy, and I'm hungry. And it's just crucial, right? So that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, when we're, THC has kind of always been the main player in cannabis, but now we have these emerging cannabinoids, obviously like CBD and CBN, and we're understanding, the pharmacological value of terpenes and flavonoids. I mean, and all the different effects that it has. There's a pathway in a molecule and some sort of biological thing happening that it's no longer, oh, I smoked this weed and it made me sleepier, it made me creative. What is happening inside your body from a molecular and chemical perspective? I mean, people are going to start getting PhDs in cannabis pharmacology because it's so robust. I don't even think you could effectively cover all of it in a full year program. You know what I'm saying? There's just so much, and it just seems there's a new cannabis.
I will tell you from experience, it's tough to cover everything in 1 year. So our philosophy in developing the coursework for our program was to try to give students who probably do want to focus on one particular area within the industry, whether that's, developing their own brand and doing entrepreneurship, doing cultivation, working on the processing side, whatever it is, we want them to give a full understanding of the entire supply chain.
Yes.
So if, they're working just specifically on product development and marketing, they need to have an understanding of what cultivars they're using, what production practices are the growers that they're buying from using, so that they can ensure integrity of their full supply chain, and vice versa. For folks who are, thinking more about growing and producing, you got to grow with, the end product in mind. So having a full understanding is really key.
Yeah, and doing so in a way that's high quality, maintains integrity, and is economical, because you can grow as much as you want, but if you're not, if you're in the business of cultivation, and your costs are super high. How do you manage costs? How do you manage a grow room from an environmental perspective? How do you make products that people actually want?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's very complex.
Yeah. So as Justin mentioned, there's a whole bunch of additional options that are tailored to student interests outside of this set of 5 classes that's really the core. So if we have a student that's coming in that knows that they really want to focus all of their efforts on, getting the best insights in cultivation, I might suggest to them that they take some coursework in greenhouse crop production or hydroponic production, specifically farm business management. If they, a lot of the folks who are coming out of our degree program are going into management level positions. So not starting out as cultivators, but coming in and in that management level.
That's kind of a nice segue, actually. Is there, at the end of the program, is there any kind of like job placement assistance associated with that?
Yeah.
Okay.
So students who take our courses at Cornell have access to the full suite of resources that are available to any Cornell student, which includes a lot of assistance with developing their resumes. There's even actually classwork that we recommend for students that talks about how to put together a really nice, tight resume or a CV, how to get out there and network and find jobs. But we also have been cultivating a lot of collaborations with folks in industry. So I, bring guest lecturers into my class who I believe are leaders in the field that have something to offer to make connections with our students so that they can, maybe develop a project together that's part of their capstone that might lead to some future connections for students. And I think all of the faculty who are teaching courses in our program have a little bit of that in mind.
Absolutely.
Yeah, we're going to, Rockefeller Institute of Government has been doing a lot of research and forecasting when it comes to this industry. And, they're talking numbers like $3.5 billion in revenue. And most importantly, in my opinion, 60,000 plus jobs. And that's great. But we need to make sure that we have a developed workforce, that we have an educated workforce. And now that you have, institutions like Cornell and FLCC and Syracuse, and, I feel like I get an email from Syracuse every other day about their new cannabis program, we can actually bring that to fruition because, it's a very complicated industry. It's not just something, not to mention if you show up to a job interview and say, what's your expectations? I've been working in the illicit market. Well, that's great, but that's not really... It's hard to quantify, in a professional position. So, not only it sounds like you guys have the total package with the education and the job placement, which is what the industry is going to need.
And I would
very
say,
soon.
Speaking on the policy side too, as we are starting to legalize and regulate, we actually really need informed and educated folks who are enacting those regulations and policies that actually know something about the plant so that we can have workable legislation.
Absolutely. Well, that's kind of part of our goal here too, is to help the general public receive that same education, at least from 100-foot level, right? So that they can get the basic idea of what really is behind the scenes. And it's not just people out selling weed on the corner, getting high. There's a bunch of science happening behind this. The whole legalization sweep is coming just as legitimate as any other business, if not more so, because there's way more barriers to entry. There's way more regulations and rules that you have to follow. It's tighter. It's not your backyard market anymore.
And I think there's been one of the cruxes, one of the cornerstones of New York State policy in particular, and it's starting to be a pattern in other states, is equity, right? Social equity. And yes, prioritize licenses and stuff within the industry is equity. But in my opinion, the most equitable thing you can do is to educate someone, whether that's health equity, whether it's industry equity. The more people know, the more they can grow. So I think being able to have platforms like Cornell, platforms like Cannabis Cum Laude, these workforce development institutions, the more we can educate people, that's, in my opinion, what equity is all about. And the cannabis industry really seems to be a very educate first, sell second. That seems to be my gathering. A lot of people are, and we know people, you are in particular, one of the best growers that I know. Here's some free advice. And it's like, you could pay for that. It's like, no, we need to let the industry go. That's how, is to educate people. Hopefully what goes out will come back in. And I think that's probably why the industry has grown so remarkably fast is, people like you guys sharing your wisdom.
To kind of extend that point a little bit, something that a lot of people don't realize about Cornell is that if you do get in, they will make sure that you're able to go there financially. Now, that may be in the form of loans, depending on what your expected FAFSA, all that is. But like, you're not, finances aren't going to be a reason that you can't go. You know what I mean? Which is a beautiful thing to have an institution that's at such a high level that's willing to just say, like, if you're smart enough, we want you here. Like, or you're willing, not even necessarily smart enough all the time. If you're willing to put in the work and the effort and show that you care, your entrance essay is great. Wow, words are really tough today, guys. I'm sorry. You'll get in there. But anyway, we're not really here to talk about that. Before we move too far away from the curriculum itself, I am curious, like you did say it's more for a professional direction, like an MBA or what have you. Is there any hiccups or barriers, like if somebody were to turn around and decide, oh, I want to go back for my doctorate? Like, if that's even a thought in their mind, is it something maybe they should look into an MS exclusively, or is that transition doable?
Yeah, I would say the focus of our program is really for students who have sort of already figured out that they probably don't want to go and, develop a career in academia. And it is a very niche thing to do as somebody who has spent the past decade or more in academia. I don't recommend it for everyone, for sure. So I would say if somebody feels like they do want to do research, if they know right now that that is a calling for them, then they should just go into an MS program. So most like research track master's programs pay a stipend. That's a huge difference from our program. And there's costs and benefits to that. So for example, if you come into our capstone program and you develop some intellectual property, if you are on the MPS side, it's more likely that you are able to retain ownership over that intellectual property because you're paying for your degree, just like, an undergraduate student does. There's a lot of gray area around there in terms of the specific situation, but that's just one example of a thing that could, make a difference one way or another. And MS takes a long time relative to the MPS, so 2 to 3 years on average, and you're really doing a super deep dive on a narrow range of topics. And if that's for you, that's great. Like if you really want to do a deep dive, awesome. If you want to feel like you have the skills and credentials to get into a management level position within the industry or to start your own company, entrepreneurship track, then probably the MPS is something that's more for you. You
need a broad spectrum, understand the supply chain. You just really going to understand how the industry works as opposed to what it's like to be in a lab.
Yeah, but I don't think anybody would ding you if you did decide at the end of it, like maybe you develop some line of inquiry that you are just really excited about that's perhaps, a little bit removed from being applied, something that, industry does tons of research, and that's great. But if it's not something that's ready to be taken to market, then, there's no reason why you couldn't continue on and pursue a PhD.
Yeah.
Cool.
No.
That was a huge question that I had burning in my head.
I was just going to say, obviously Cornell has been in the hemp game for a while, couple of years, 2-3 years. And obviously New York recently legalized, and obviously we're waiting for the OCM to be established and license and regulations. So we can actually have an industry up and running and some clarity about what that industry looks like. But how has the program changed and where is it going now that cannabis and THC is now legal in New York?
That is an excellent question, something that we are getting asked all the time. So I'm happy to be able to give that answer more broadly out to a larger audience, which is Cornell is a federally funded institution, needs to wait until things become legal at a federal level. So that said, Justin's been in my class, and I tell students in my class that there's a lot of realities in the industry. Like I can't teach you how to grow high THC plants. I can teach you how to grow high CBD plants for sure.
Yeah.
And if you know the biology of the plant, you know that it's really just a couple enzymes that are different. But there's some things at Cornell that we just can't do. So for example, my processing class, I don't teach students how to put cannabinoids in food or beverage products because that is not federally legal.
Yeah.
So as soon as those federal changes happen, then, it might be a different discussion. But for now, all of our curriculum is essentially compliant with things that are illegal at the federal level. And that's not going to change until it changes federally.
I wonder if that will open up. Is scheduling a thing, or would it have to be full blown legal? You might not even be able to answer that question.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I don't even think I can answer. I feel like, that's
because Chuck Schumer just put up that bill. I believe it was to lower the scheduling.
Yeah, the Cannabis Opportunity and Administrative Act that essentially will remove cannabis from. It's very complex, and I have not read it in its entirety. But the one big thing that it does is it deschedules it, which is really the number one reason why all the criminalization and the lack of banking and all the the lack of being able for institutions like yours to get involved is because it's a Schedule I drug. If that gets removed, the banking barriers get released. Interstate commerce is now permitted. Everybody gets in, and from an industry perspective, you're looking at massive, unprecedented growth because all these numbers that are coming out of all these states. So Illinois does another $1 billion. Colorado does another $1 billion. A, it's pretty much all in cash. B, that doesn't include ancillary business numbers, legal, graphic design, all those non-plant touching businesses. And C, it's supposed to be business confined within the borders of the state. If you already have existing infrastructure and you're doing $5 million a year selling gummies to Colorado residents, and all of a sudden you have access to the continental U.S., imagine what your business can be, what it can scale. And that bill will allow that. You'll be able to get checking, loans, working capital loans, all that stuff. So the importance of this bill, and that's just the industry part. There's a lot of other importance in terms of social equity, in terms of medical, all this stuff. So don't let me think I'm saying one's better than the other. From an industry perspective, because that's where I am, massive, unprecedented growth if this bill gets passed.
Sorry to change directions entirely here. I want to touch back on two of the more hands-on and more really super I guess I don't know if it's more hands-on, but the production and the processing class. Can you kind of walk me through how those work? Are they plant touching? Are they hands-on? Are they what kind of extracts or processing are they able to perform?
Yeah, for sure. And just to reflect back on that regulatory discussion, that's a feature of the industry everyone is challenged to deal with. And I will say that's not different in education for sure. We just want to be really careful that we are following the letter of the law in all things. So yeah, and that's in both of my classes, I try to make that as clear as possible from the beginning. So in production systems, I would say that's one that has some plant touching components to it. It's a little bit hands-on, but the first iteration we did of that course was in the fall of this past year during the pandemic. So that was just a wildly different experience than I had thought it was going to be. And I would love to see that course develop a little bit more hands-on component. But we start out by learning about the physiology of the plant, traits that are important to different market segments, thinking about cultivar selection and taking a deep dive on the data that we're starting to generate. That's, it's coming from all over the world, including from great research programs at Cornell. We do a little bit of plant touching in terms of looking at issues like germination. We look at the anatomy of the plant. One area that I love to see this class grow into is to add a lab section where students can actually trial different production practices and methods in the class. But awesome. Currently, it is just a 2-credit course that's mostly lecture and things that happen in the classroom itself. So, there's a little bit of limit on what we can do there, but a lot of hands-on activity comes in the spring semester when we do the hemp processing class. That is really focused towards hands-on work. So we do everything from seed cleaning. We run all the equipment, a dehulling line, cleaning, sorting, everything. Super fun. We do almost a whole day on that. We do decortication. We make hempcrete blocks in the class. We do a lot of analytical chemistry. That's a super important part of the industry, is being able to accurately quantify what is in your plant material, what's in your extracts the whole way through, so that you can ensure not only that you're compliant, but also that you're producing a really good quality product that's safe as well. So we do a lot of hands-on work on the analytical side, and then also covering a couple different extraction methods and a little bit of post-process methodology. So, I mean, and in terms of extraction, I would say that broadly includes a lot of things like dry sifting or making bubble hash, or we're doing oil infusion extractions, trialing different methods that have been developed for that, doing ethanol extraction, looking at those different methods. So there's a lot of different things that we get our hands on in that class.
And also, you were telling me that in the production class, you actually get to go out into Cornell's. It's in the fall, so you get to go out to Cornell's hemp fields where they have grain and fiber trials, they have flower trials. You get to actually walk through these big fields and see how monstrous some of these things can get.
Yeah.
Thanks for reminding me of that. That was really fun. So that was a nice trip that we did in the fall last year, was to go to our cannabinoid trial sites and see. I mean, that's, you're not going to see very many sites that have as many cultivars as that, and look at different production practices. So a lot of people are growing on black plastic, doing a plasticulture method, but we're also trialing a bunch of different methods like high density planting for autoflower varieties. We've been looking at trials of those, assessing, insect damage, looking at disease incidence on plants. I think we ran over to our grain and fiber trials and looked at how those fields were looking. So some of them plots had been harvested already, but there were still some standing. So we could see the grain. We could see things like the birds, which eat a lot of grain. That's a huge problem for grain production that
male
people
plants.
don't think about. Yeah, male plants everywhere out there with grain and fiber production. No male plants on our cannabinoid production site, and they are separated from each other. So that's always good. But yeah.
And there was also kind of an entrepreneurial aspect to that production class that was like, I think is really crucial, right? As the project that kind of runs almost the whole course. And I'll let you detail that a little bit if you want.
Yeah, I would say that is a big feature of the class. Both my production class and my processing class have that same structure to them, where we start out the class with students developing sort of a pitch on what their final product might look like. If they are going to start out a production enterprise, what's the market? What is the, how's that market shifted and changed? Where are they going to fit their product into that landscape so that they can think about the production choices that they would make upstream from that with their product choice in mind? So broadly, this whole, project follows the sequence of the class, thinking about things like what cultivars are you going to select for your enterprise and justifying why you selected those cultivars with some data that's out there. Thinking about how you're going to go about, are you going to do indoor? Are you going to do greenhouse? Are you going to do large scale field production? Are you going to do horticultural style production where every plant is getting a lot of care and trellising? What's your pest management going to look like for pathogens, weeds, insects, everything all the way up through harvest, and how you're going to manage that harvest, which is a huge pain point for growers. Whether you're in the cannabinoid side, for sure, there's a lot that needs to happen really quickly all at one time, but also for grain and fiber production, because a lot of the infrastructure for handling that harvest is just not been developed yet.
Well, I mean, you essentially have the makings of a business plan when you're done too, where if you are trying to get into the entrepreneurial path, you could actually just take this as an opportunity to start developing your plan. You know what I mean? And then take it as a jump off point to move forward right there, already done, did it in class. Thank you.
And I would say the most compelling point of that is the farm enterprise budget that you have to complete at the end, detailing, of all the choices that you made along the way for what you're going to put into your crop and what cultivars you're going to select. How much did you invest and how much can you expect to return on that investment, depending on your strategy for bringing it to market?
Yeah, it's huge.
Yeah. And, I've been through, I'm a cannabis entrepreneur. I've been in the space for 5 years, and, I kind of had to figure it out on my own. I had to shoot blindly and make a million mistakes and not really have a ton of guidance, because when I got started, there wasn't a ton of experts. I didn't have it in grad school or any of that. So to be able to have those resources and have that guidance will just help you get from A to C without going through all the crap that a lot of people have to go through. And it just makes the streamlines the entrepreneurial process. Because, quite frankly, as excited I love, the traditional supply chain growing and production. And it's like, there's all these bottlenecks like trimming and how can we produce, all these controlled environmental, different technologies. That's what I'm really excited about is like, here's supply chain A through D, right? And here's all these bottlenecks, and it's going to be institutions like that have the funding, that have the resources, that have the guidance, because that's where the industry is really disruptive. Because it's still so much in its infancy that we're still, hand trimming 1,000 plants at a time. I don't care if you grow, $10 million worth of the most fire crop in the world. If you can't trim it, you can't sell it. So how are we going to solve that problem? How are we going to solve all these other problems? The utility problem, where do we bring in sustainability technology into this? So, that's honestly kind of where it really excites me. And to have a platform like that is just, from an entrepreneurial perspective, invaluable.
Yeah. And I think having access at Cornell also, I can't say enough about just the huge diversity of expertise that we have. It's been with great controlled environment agriculture program that is going to bring in already a lot of expertise that's super relevant to the industry. There's a lot of chemistry knowledge there. So when we're thinking about other pain points like curing, for example, if you're thinking about growing for the flower market, how do you maintain the quality or even enhance the quality of your product through the cure process? We have people who know so much about, environmental control for product storage and who know so much about plant chemistry that can help, to help you to think and strategize about how you're going to evolve your profile of your flower as it's curing.
Yeah, every step of that process, especially from a craft. You can speak to it the best of anybody I know. Curing is growing the plant. It really isn't overly complicated, right? You got to take good care of it, but it's the post-production process of curing and trimming and treating that is like the difference between a mid-grade product and a premium product. And we're all trying to, produce premium products. That's where the money is. But it's these little technical, and we have to get away from a lot of the bro science, which does still hold some weight. A lot of things are built on anecdote, but to be able to say proof at 60 degrees humidity or, relative humidity, 60, degrees Fahrenheit, this is how you should cure. To have science tied to that, it's just going to make end quality products just so much better.
And I don't definitely as a scientist, I don't want to, diss on bro science or all of this wealth of knowledge that has been generated by underground growers. I feel like that is just a treasure trove of potential knowledge that we can then, bring into the lab, bring into
future
our
papers.
grow chambers and test and generate some data. And some of it might not hold up. Maybe a lot of it won't hold up, but some of it might be just gold.
Yeah,
so
absolutely. It's a great starting point.
Well, and it probably wouldn't have been so much looked at as trichomes as a stress response if there wasn't so many stress techniques being applied to these plants underground all across the country, all across the world, I'm sure. Anyway, we are kind of getting close to the end of part one. But I do want to know before we kind of end that to move into part two, you had your start and did your PhD in entomology. What kind of prompted you to transition into cannabis and kind of take that on full speed?
Yeah, I would say my big motivation that originally actually brought me into entomology was thinking about production and farming practices and how we can align those with values around sustainability and protecting and conserving biodiversity. That's what got me in originally into entomology as a career and as an academic field, was thinking about all the beneficial services that are provided by biodiversity, like wild bees, which we will touch on in the next episode. And I've always had a really strong appreciation for the amazing thing that plants do with, the chemistry that they have and how that mediates their interactions with the world. So when I got an opportunity to bring those two passions together, which we'll talk about in the next episode on, working with cannabis plants and working with bees, that is I think the thing for me that really lit the fire and got me thinking about what it might look like if I was going to switch my focus from this more, applied biodiversity, ecology, conservation world to thinking about how that might look if I branch out into the cannabis space.
Definitely.
It's best of both worlds.
Makes sense.
Huge.
I mean, one experience, it's all it takes for most of us to get hooked on this plant. So that is going to conclude part one for this discussion. I want to thank you again, Dr. Grab, for joining us. And as for you listeners, don't forget to like and subscribe. It's absolutely free. It's a beautiful way to show us your support. But if you do want to support the show financially, head on over to patreon.com/cannabis cum laude or follow the link in the show notes. And as always, elevate your state of mind.
Thanks to our friends here at Rockbox Recording and Production in Rochester, New York. They are a full professional podcast and video studio designed by a radio guy for podcasters. Audio, video, voiceovers, editing, whatever. Mouth off at Rockbox at rockbox.com.
You can follow Cannabis Cum Laude on LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Cannabuzz. Type Cannabis Cum Laude into your search bar and you should be able to find us, but the links will also be posted in the episode notes as well. If you want to help support the show, head on over to Patreon, and that will ensure that we're able to keep the best quality sound and video coming to you on a regular basis. And if you liked what you heard today, please don't forget to rate and review the show.